Welcome back to Embracing Marketing Mistakes. I'm Chris Norton, and today we're talking media training and perfecting that all-important interview. You know, the moment when you admit on camera that you wouldn't use your own credit card because it's too expensive, and then you make headlines around the world for all the wrong reasons.
If I'm honest, I wouldn't use the card myself. It's just too expensive.
His comment sparking headlines.
Today, we're going to break down exactly why that happens and how we can stop it happening to you and your brand. If you're ever worried about a journalist trapping you into a viral clip, this masterclass will help you spot the dirty tricks that they do and shut down that negative questioning in the next interview. Today, I'm joined by my business partner, Will Ockenden, for a special media training masterclass. We dissect the infamous Sainsbury CEO hot mic blunder, where a simple song killed a merger, and reveal why the skills you used to have are no longer fit for purpose in this AI digital world. In this episode, you're going to learn how to handle the deceptive Columbo question. That's for the 1980s crew.
Just one more thing. You said you were at the movies?
Just help me understand. You left around 9, right? And you didn't see anyone else?
Yeah, that's right.
How to use the stop talking technique to save your skin, and what it takes to turn a crisis into a reputation win. Let's get into it. Okay, so today's training is, as I said, it's a media training masterclass, how to land messages in a digital or social first world. So, as I said, my name is Chris Norton. I'm the founder and the managing director. It says here innovation lead. So I do lead a lot of the innovation in the agency, whether that's AI, the podcasting side of things, and various bits and bobs. I've been working in PR for more than 25 years. I've been involved in a lot of PR crises. I actually wrote the handbook for the CIPR on crisis management, their section on that. So yeah, that is my area of expertise. And so I've seen a lot of media screw ups, shall we say, even when people have been prepared. So we might cover a couple of those today. And then Will can introduce himself too. Will you, my business partner?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm the other owner at Prohibition, so I tend to look after creative and strategy. I've actually delivered a number of these media training sessions in the last year or so for clients, and what's particularly interesting is the impact of digital on the traditional media interview, which is really what we're going to cover today. So perhaps the skills that we used to have when it came to media interviews are no longer fit for purpose. Some of them are, but some of the skills are no longer fit for purpose in a digital first world. And there's a whole new dynamic at play. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so hopefully there'll be a lot of practical stuff in here that you can take away. This is not one of those things where this is not like a lot of theory. We're hoping to put a lot of practical bits and pieces that you can use on your next interview. So what we're going to be covering, who the hell are we? Prohibition. We've got a couple of slides on us. Why is media training so important? We're going to talk about the evolving media landscape and how things have changed from traditional PR when I first started out, when we actually used fax machines to send press releases and post, by the way. We used to, that was my first job, posting press releases. So things have changed and how that's changed. Preparing for an interview, so how to prepare properly, interview tips and tricks. And yeah, we'll cover interview tips and tricks, and it also covers what sort of support we can give you. So if you find today useful, we do, as Will's just said, media training. We've done loads of recent ones for universities as well recently, media training. And talking of universities, Prohibition's experience. So we work with all various sectors, really. We work at food and drink, retail, FMCG, a lot of universities we work with, as you can see, the University of Oxford, London Metropolitan University. We also work with a few Yorkshire businesses like Yorkshire Water. We do a lot of their videos and content and stuff like that. So yeah, we quite a breadth of experience and a bit of luxury as well. So yeah, all good. So a bit about us. So Prohibition, we've got 30 consultants based in Leeds. We're in the north of the UK. Not that the way you're based matters anymore, I don't think. I've heard that the US are looking a lot over here to work with UK agencies because they think the UK is good at it. So that's good. But what we do is we do insight-led PR that converts. So that's kind of like where traditional and digital PR merge, because I used to teach digital and integrated PR at university on the PR degrees at university. And we try and bring that skill to traditional PR and media training and all the other bits and pieces that we do. So we try to use insight and to build our strategy out. And obviously all that is to help you build your reputation and trust, because trust in a digital world really matters. People trust less and less. If any of you read the Edelman Trust Barometer, you'll have seen that trust is at an all-time low. People don't trust the PM. They don't trust Donald Trump. They don't trust Elon Musk. They don't trust social media. They don't trust. In fact, the only people they do trust, weirdly, are other employees that they've never met. Which is, we apparently trust strangers over, and especially if they're employees. That's the latest research, but that's because of just the way of the digital world has gone. So we do what we call performance PR, which is PR that is targeting not only reputation and trust, but also that actually delivers some sort of tangible benefit. So if you're going to get coverage, why are we getting that coverage? Do we get leads? Is there a way we can get some kind of conversion for our client? So we call it performance PR. And then content creation. So we create everything and anything from, in fact, right opposite me now, we're filming a live podcast for one of our clients, who's a negotiation skills client, and they're all in our boardroom filming with 5 cameras, and we can do LinkedIn lives, all done live and recorded. So yeah, content wise, we do tons and tons of that. So that's enough about us. I told you that this was going to be practical and useful. And as I say, Will's going to cover a lot of the tips. Our podcast is called Embracing Marketing Mistakes. And it's literally people talking about mistakes that have happened to them. And they tell their story on the pod. Obviously, we don't just focus on that. But they do, that's like 20% of the show. But they're always the best bit. It's when people tell us when something's gone really wrong and what they learned from it. Because that's what everyone wants to hear. And that's why we started our podcast about nearly 2 years ago about that. But yeah. Okay, so the benefits of media training then. Well, you can hopefully control interviews better and be a bit more convincing on camera. Now, for someone who started out in PR 25 years ago, PR people were always behind the camera. I was advising clients on what to do to make sure the client, the CEO might have done the occasional camera interview, but mainly it was for interviews with the Times, the FT or whatever. If you got on BBC Breakfast or whatever it is back then, that was quite a rarity. So being prepared will really help you to be more convincing on camera. It can make you look and sound more confident. And if you're more confident, you're credible. So what to do with your hands. As you can see, I'm quite animated with mine. To handle hostile and probing interviews and to do some sort of damage control. Now, if you're thinking that you're going to be grilled like Jeremy Paxman or a Radio 4 interview, that can happen, but it depends on what the kind of story it is. But 90% of the time, it won't happen in that way. But today's training is like a snapshot to help you think about what happens if maybe that worst case scenario does occur as well, because it can do. Be prepared for curveballs and sneaky interview tricks. I talk about a few of these on a couple of the podcasts that we've done on media training. And turn a negative situation into neutral or positive. So if you've got a crisis breaking, is there a way that you can make it look that you care, you're authentic, and therefore protecting the brand? Because some brands have gone through proper PR crises where something's, whether it's a plane crash or whatever, and actually if the CEO and the board and the people that are involved in the interviews look sincere and authentic, some of the brands have come out building stronger and better reputation despite the crisis. It's one of the reasons you see a lot of product recalls announced with honesty and integrity in the media.
I was just going to say, Chris, the first point, be convincing on camera. Like you said, I think one of the big things to change in the last few years, which Chris will talk about, is now that everybody's now got a camera. So, a print journalist might turn up with a camera now. So there's actually way more opportunities to be on camera, like it or not. It's not just the big broadcasters that bring a film crew anymore. Yeah,
true. Yeah, and also, one of the key things of that is what's in your background. I actually haven't thought about my background, so I'm not practicing while I preach. I'm in the office, so there's just a window. But some people don't think about their background. So if they're going to be on BBC TV, when it's on a small screen, you can't really see it. But then it's like when we record our podcasts, and on this, when you look at it on a small screen, you can't see the background, and then suddenly, when it's on a big screen or YouTube, you can see it on a big TV. Like, oh my God, I didn't realize that was in the background. We interviewed someone recently, one of the Star Wars characters, C-3PO's head in the background. And I didn't spot it on the call because we were talking to a small screen, whereas when it was blown up, it was big. So just to be aware of, in case you've got anything in the background you don't want on TV.
It's like when people have, when politicians sit in front of their bookcase and they strategically place the book spines to make themselves look really intelligent, don't they?
Yeah, quite a few people do that. I've noticed more and more of that. Okay, so 78% then, almost 80% of business leaders say they had experienced a crisis in the past 18 months. That's bad. Like 8 in 10 people have experienced a crisis of some kind in the past 18 months. And it takes between 1 and 5 years, the amount of time that a board member said it took to fully recover from a crisis. It's around about 3 years. 1 year's quite not a very long period. I'd say about 3 to 5 years to recover from a crisis. And being brilliant at interviews can't prevent a crisis, but it can minimize it. It can help you speed up your recovery. So if you've got a crisis happen. You can't control everything. You just can't. You can't control everything in an interview. All you can do is prepare for it and be as best prepared and understand what you've got to talk about. And if you do a good interview that's authentic and clear, then you've got a better chance of minimizing the crisis, but you can't stop it. And digital is now influencing the media landscape. So what we mean by that is in the old days, it was just an interview, whereas now, as Will just highlighted there, you might get a print journalist turning up to, especially if it's a national or something like that. And even the business titles now might turn up for an interview. And they used to just bring they'll bring their phone, stick it on the table and record you, which is a problem if you say something wrong. And sometimes they bring along a camera and just say, do you mind if I just set this up? This is going on the internet. And then they'll just film it. So you just need to be aware that could happen. Yeah, and broadcast media is still there. TV. I put something on LinkedIn recently where I think it was M&S said they were spending as much on internet video, the sorts of video we do, same budget behind that as they were on TV. And people say, are you saying TV's dead? No, TV's still there. TV is still got good cut through. The top right here, you can see this is it was on BBC Look North. This is one of our clients, Stockeld Park. We got them on Look North in December for their Christmas adventure, and then 2 days later we also got them on BBC Breakfast. And that had real, they sold out tickets for Christmas, which is amazing. But TV audiences, we put here TV news audiences are in decline. TV audiences are in decline. People, Netflix, all the different 5 streaming channels, live TV audiences are decreasing. I only saw last week with EastEnders 40th anniversary, the numbers now, EastEnders used to get 25, 30 million people watching it. As David Frost's, I heard David Frost's kid's been interviewed. That his interviews used to get 14, 15 million people watching them. And now, like, EastEnders gets 2 million for a decent episode. So, but broadcast is still the most used platform for consuming news. But we believe there's a dumbing down of broadcasts. So there's much more of a soundbiteable culture where people are driving for content that they can snip it and then stick on social media. So they might ask the curveball questions if it's a broadcast interview, especially if they've got a camera, just to throw you off and to get that viral moment that they can then clip that bit and stick it online. So you need to be aware of it. This is our, on the right-hand side, that's our client from Chow Praya, which is a Thai restaurant. The bit of coverage we got for it just in November. But print readership is declining year on year globally too. Online news sources with video are going strong though. So the media the landscape is changing. It's constantly changing, and the online people are trying to figure out ways to capture that, your dollars and sponsorship and advertising for the content, because they used to sell, newspapers, print magazines. Some of them still play a role, but they are declining. I mean, heavily declined. But there's still an opportunity for longer, more nuanced content. So what do we mean by that? Well, broadcast and radio. Broadcast still going strong. It's amazing me that the big broadcast brands like Global and Virgin, etc., are getting rid of the localized news, because I think hyper-local news is where it's at. People still want hyper-local news from but a lot of the nationals are buying out all the regional, local radio stations. Commercial radio is leading over national stations, but under time pressure, be succinct, though pods present longer form content. So podcasts present the opportunity to interview people for a longer time and to turn what would be, a 5-minute chat into a much longer conversation. So actually, as part of a strategy, a podcast to place our clients, for instance, on podcasts that are relevant to their target audience are actually a great way to show them as a thought leader. And good sound bites are key. So bulletins are repeated throughout the day. So if they get a good sound bite and you've said something clever, or your client or your CEO has said a clever comment, they'll keep coming back to that and playing it over and over again. Hopefully the sound's going to work on this. All media outlets now have active social media communities. They realize they've got to put their clips on social. They're looking for those clips. I've got an example here that we've got from TikTok, which is a rugby player called Max. How do you say his name, Will? Max Lahif. Lahif. There you go. It's snackable video content is how it's distributed to social media. So there's a real drive to get these little sound bites. Mistakes like our podcast, blunders, great quotes can all go viral. And publishers are hoping these will happen. So here's an interview with a rugby player, and they keep trying to get these interviews with Max because he interviews slightly different to your everyday rugby player if you've never seen him before.
I'm hoping most of you at home understand what he's just said because I haven't got a clue. You've never faced them before. Bristol versus Leinster, never been done. The first to do it.
Mate, I'm buzzing for it, obviously. Edification beckons, Ryan. Like, it's going to be class. But this lull just before the kickoff as the Leinster boys march in is always a bit weird. It's like a paradox. You've got the enthusiasm, but the anxiety is there, and it kind of coalesces into sort of a psychosis that allows you to throw yourself willingly into a melee of well-nourished shoulders, and this day it'll be to us. I'm so excited. Yeah.
I mean, that is brilliant.
And I suppose the point on that is, when news clips go viral, quite niche broadcasters can become incredibly famous, and these clips get shared around, and all the traffic goes back to their kind of landing pages. So it's in their interest for unusual, quirky interviews, and journalists are actively seeking that kind of content.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And then, remember, if you're a great interviewee, you'll get invited back time and time again. So this is one of our clients called Tony. He's the CEO of Huthway International. And we managed to place him on Sky News, you can see here. He did an interview because Huthway International do negotiation skills, how to negotiate difficult, challenging scenarios. They teach businesses how to negotiate hard contracts. And actually, we used him as an interviewee about negotiating during the Brexit negotiations and got him on Sky News. And then because he gave such a great interview and knows what he's talking about when to play your card, etc., and how to deal with a negotiating situation. They kept inviting him back and over again. So we kept getting more and more placements for him. So yeah, if you get the interview right the first time, you can get 5 or 6 interviews out of one.
Mm. By the same token, typically you get invited onto broadcast media once, and if you mess it up, you'll never be back. You'll never be invited again. So it's really important to really prepare and do a good job. And like Chris said, if you get it right, then you're going to go into their little black book, and you'll get invited back time and time again.
Do you remember that guy that was on BBC Breakfast and he came on and he'd gone for a job interview and they thought he was the guest and they sat him straight on the sofa and started interviewing him and he answered all the questions brilliantly.
Wasn't it about some really techie story about Apple's privacy revelations? And he looked so fearful, didn't he? It was hilarious.
But he answered all the questions quite well and they went, "Thank you very much." And it turned out that they'd put the wrong person on the sofa and he was actually there for a job interview.
It was like in the IT team or something, wasn't it? Something completely unrelated.
It was classic. Anyway, so now let's get on to the training then. Understanding journalists then. We need to understand what journalists are like. They're not always trying to catch you out. Most of them can be nice and they're just looking for a story. However, they can often be cynical. You would say that, wouldn't you? I used to say that when I'm teaching my PR execs to selling on the phones, when I first started my job in PR, trying to pitch stories, I was told, because I used to work in IT PR, and I was always told to just think that the journalists are just thinking at the other end, so what, as you're pitching your story to make it interesting to them. Broadcast journalists are now often entertainers as well. They want to be entertaining. They don't just want the story. They want the more human side. They want it to be entertaining. They don't just want to report the facts. But they are rarely the expert. They'll like to think they are, but you're actually the expert. That's why you're on the show. You're there to give your opinion, and they're there to get that from you. They might perform the devil's advocate while interviewing. So, you'll say something and give your side of the story. And especially if it's the BBC or something like that, because the BBC has to be neutral. So if you're putting one side of the story, they'll immediately play the devil's advocate to play the other side of the story to stop, from it being just a PR exercise. But it's not that they're against you. It's that they're trying to present the content balance. But often they'll back you if it's fair. They are not there to give you a free plug. You're there to get yourself a plug. And it's amazing when you see someone interviewed and they manage to get a plug cleverly in without overly crowbarring it in. So the rise of the content creator journalist. So this is interesting. So you've got content creator journalists, but I would say this has happened from the day of the blogger. And blogging came out in 1998. They were called citizens journalists, and it's like that they were the influencers before influencers became influencers. And now we've got content creator journalists, essentially influencers. They are often not professionally trained. Now, that's fine. It means they can't do shorthand, but it also means they're not members of any association, and they don't follow ethical standards. So they might, if you said, with some journalists, you can say off the record, and they might take it. You can have an embargo, which might stop them using a story before a certain date or time. Well, somebody that's not not a journalist trained won't do that. They'll just take the story straight. So yeah, you've got to be mindful of that these people aren't properly trained. So what do they want? What do they want from you? Well, they don't want jargon or corporate speak. Often, if you see someone like a physicist or something like that being interviewed by the BBC, they try to dumb it down to make it, instead of talking about astrophysics, explain it in so you're talking to your grand type thing, so someone can understand. It's one of the reasons why Professor Brian Cox is so well known now, because he's so brilliant at explaining complicated subject matter in something very, very easy to understand. Often they want someone who's honest and authentic, not somebody who feels like robotic or protective, or, if you're honest and authentic, is, all the things that a politician often aren't. They want dialogue. Yeah, preferably personalized. So they want you to answer with, an interesting story or to at least be personable, rather than just like, I've got my key messages and that's all I'm going to say. And, so they can't get a bit of dialogue out of you. But they also want a strong news hook or a clear response. They want to know what the news is, nice and clearly. That's their story. That's what they're trying to get to the bottom of.
Just go back a sec, Chris. I was going to say that points 2 and 3, the idea of authenticity is really important now. And you take someone like Greg Jackson, who's the CEO of Octopus Energy, or actually somebody like Michael O'Leary from Ryanair, love him or hate him. They are very honest in how they come across, and they're very authentic as well. And they have got bags of personality, and that's the reason why they're constantly on the TV. And I think there is a shift towards that, away from kind of corporate robots that just give you your key messages. There's no personality there. People don't want that anymore. Yeah.
And Michael O'Leary, I saw it in the story last week. Was it last week or the week before? There was a story anyway about Michael O'Leary at Ryanair, and he's set up a taxi company, and it owns one black cab. And that's just so he can get through London in the taxi.
Oh, I saw that.
Did you see that?
We could use taxi lanes.
Yeah, so he can use taxi lanes legally. He's got one cab in this company that he uses. Mental. That's like, talk about disruptive. Anyway, controlling the narrative. There's 3 stages here. So there's intelligence gathering on the journalist and on the situation. Then once you've decided, what's being said, what this journalist's about, so you know how they tick, then you can establish what you're going to say, what you're going to say. You can guess most of it. Sometimes they'll tell you some of the questions they're going to ask you as well. And then you can practice what you're going to say and look over what you're going to say, just to make sure that, because practice does make perfect. And the more that you practice your responses, then that can really help you with getting the answer right. And in terms of intelligence gathering, there's a few things that you can use. So, we're not for life, suggesting that you need to research every single journalist that you're ever going to speak to. But if it's if it's going to be in quite a decent publication, there's something called journalisted that you can use that shows journalists that are independent journalists that have covered stories. You can see what sort of stories they've covered before, their writing style, what they like to talk about, because you could good feel for what the sort of things they cover. Also, you can use, if there's an issue that they're talking about, if, maybe you're being interviewed about Brexit, for instance, and if you're being interviewed about Brexit, you can then do social listening around Brexit, or maybe it's a certain part of Brexit, and then you can do social listening around that. And there's an example at the bottom there with British Airways, where you could research the brand and see what are the key things being talked about, what's positive, what's negative. It just gives you a barometer for what could this journalist want to talk about, and what sort of angle are they going to come from, and that gives you a few ideas. A couple of examples here that we've got is my Keepmoat Hell. So a few years ago, we worked with a house builder called Keepmoat, new house builder, and somebody had some snagging issues with their house. They kept fixing them, but they weren't happy with it. So they created a website called My Keepmoat Hell, which unfortunately was quite clever. It was copying a crisis in America, which, for Dell. They had My Dell Hell. So they just copied the strategy, created a site, and it became, I think it was ranked third on on Google. So we had to do a lot of work to get rid of that and to minimize the damage by that. But obviously the board were quite concerned by that. And then they would pop up and create groups, like you can see at the bottom here, like Facebook groups, all about new house builds and the problems with them, etc., etc. The point is, if you're looking after your brand, is to check out, do some intelligence gathering. See, are there people derogatory comments and things like that about you? Where are they? What are they? Do a proper analysis. And if you don't know how to do that, hire somebody like us who can do that, who can analyze the media landscape and tell you these guys could be a problem. Maybe identify the people behind it. We've done that on loads and loads of different crises. It really stops. It can nip things in the bud before they become, like a website like that. So, establishing what you're going to say then. What are the facts of the issue? What are you going to be discussing? What are the facts that you can discuss? Are there any specific angles that the journalist will want to ask you? What are the risk factors to your business about the issue that you're going to be covering? What are the risks? Are there any wider issues that you need to be aware of? Political, in the industry, anything that you need to be aware of? What key messages do you need to convey? I like to keep it to 3. The power of 3, you see it: build back better, make America great again, which is 4. They've done that's the second time. But, see it, something sorted.
Sort it.
That's it. They're all 3. The government used them all the time. They used it during the pandemic as well. So, 3 key messages. And have the wow statistics at your fingertips. So if you're doing a radio interview or something like that, one of the things when we do like a radio day with a client, our marketing director or whatever, we'll have the key stats for, say they're doing an interview with, BBC Wolverhampton. We'd have all the stats on Wolverhampton. So they've got the stats at the fingertips. They could go, oh, well, actually, in your area, there's 83% of people from Wolverhampton found, and they love that. The media absolutely love it. Yeah. So what I've done here is obviously, it wouldn't be a marketing webinar if we didn't talk about AI, but we're not going to talk about it loads. But in terms of media training, how can you use AI? So this is a really simple prompt that I've used here. Act like a world-class journalist and media trainer. Please put together some tough questions related on this press release. And it's basically a press release about a new chat function on WhatsApp. So we've shared the link to the news site for Facebook's WhatsApp announcement, and we're just asking it to put together some tough questions. So this is a great way to just get some, as you can see, I'll just do it live. You could put any press release in that you want and ask it to ask you some. WhatsApp has promoted end-to-end encryption. How do these new fun functionalities interact with encryption? Even if messages are encrypted, WhatsApp collects metadata. Are these new features increasing? So it'll ask you all sorts of different questions that maybe you've not considered. Some of which you will, some of you won't. As you can see, there's 11 questions there, all key around the problem around that news release. So it's just giving you a few ideas of what you can talk about.
Yeah, and I think on that, PR, as PRs or comms professionals, the Q&A is an important part of any press release, and we'll have a discussion around what likely questions will come up. But you can use ChatGPT or AI to supplement that, and typically there's one or two questions or angles we never would have thought about. It's just a really good way to kind of save time, I suppose, in that respect. Okay, so interview tips and tricks. I'm gonna cover a few dirty tricks used by journalists, but I do want to say, professionally trained journalists are guided by ethical standards. It's not about dirty tricks. It's rather about clever techniques that they often use, which will elicit a certain response. So it's really important that you know what these tips and these techniques are, so you can respond appropriately to them. And the last thing you want is to be on a live interview scenario and be blindsided by a difficult question. And like Chris said, you're not going to be interviewed by Jeremy Paxman or Kay Burley. That might be 1 in 10 interviews that you do. Most interviews, the journalist is going to be supportive and is going to want to get good content, and they're not going to want to catch you out. So I don't want to overly alarm you. Something worth defining though is, and I think there's a lot, we always say, can we talk off the record? And it's almost become kind of common parlance. But I think it's worth defining what is on and off the record in a media interview. So off the record means it's not directly attributable to you. So often you see in political interviews, for example, the BBC will say something like, the BBC understands that, Chris, do you mind muting?
Yeah, sure.
Off the record, for example, the BBC would say something like, BBC understands that Keir Starmer's team wants to do this. So that's off the record. Somebody in government has briefed the journalist, but it's not attributable. On the record is attributable, so you're going to be directly quoted. One should assume that any media interview is on the record unless you specify. So basically, anything you say the moment you start speaking to a journalist, and by the way, from the moment you walk into the room, not the moment the tape recorder starts recording. So assume everything you say is on the record. If you want something to be off the record, you need to say, can this be off the record? And then it becomes not attributable. If you're not confident with this stuff, I wouldn't even go down this route. And I think good journalists will honour that. I'd say 95% of journalists will honour that because it's about part of their kind of code of ethics. But in effect, everything is on the record because it's, whether it's attributable or not, it's going to make it into the piece. It's just whether they quote you or not. So be aware of that. And like I say, from the moment you walk into the room to the moment you walk out the room, assume everything's on the record. I've actually blurred out this piece of media coverage because I didn't want to drop the individual in it. But we worked with let's say a B2B company in the removal business many years ago, and the founder of the company did a regional business interview, but he basically spent half the interview cracking jokes with the journalist and giving kind of salubrious stories about the company and about the history. And he assumed this stuff wouldn't make it into the final piece because he didn't kind of give adequate consideration to what's on and off the record. Can I just say, before you continue, we did clearly prep him as well before he went into this interview, saying, don't make jokes, don't do that. We did the insight and everything. So we properly prepared him. And we even had a sheet that he should go through. And he just, because he thought he'd built an excellent rapport with the journalist, he was using what he called banter with the journalist. But actually, the journalist was just recording it verbatim. And it led to some, I must admit, it led to some amazing quotes. So the business owner fled to the other side of the world to escape the family business. We have been accused of being the reason why somebody had a miscarriage, and even my husband got cancer because of you. And this was all stuff he told the journalist, as a passing comment, as a bit of a joke, and it all made it into the piece. And it was a bloody disaster, actually, the article. It could have been a really good profile, but he failed to give consideration to what's on and off the record. So beware. It's not just Jeremy Paxman. It's not just Piers Morgan. It's a regional newspaper as well that might take advantage of this. Now, this is one of my favorite videos on the internet. But the point is, a lot of interviews now are done via video conferencing. Post-COVID, this became a massive thing. And, you now don't have to drive to Manchester to the Salford studios of the BBC at 5 a.m. or go down to London to go to the Good Morning Britain studios. You can often dial in via Zoom or via Teams. But what I would say is be acutely aware of what's happening in your background. Framing is really important. You need to be in the middle of you need to be smartly dressed or appropriately dressed rather, well lit. You need a decent background, as Chris has said. Ideally, you need to have briefed everybody in your house that an interview is about to happen. You need to have a good connection. You don't want your family to be downloading a movie or playing video games the moment you're doing an interview and it's a jittery connection. Think about your backdrop. Is it plain? Is it a world map in this case, which kind of conveyed the right image? Is it a bookcase? A ring light is a good idea, or at least decent lighting so that you're kind of well lit. And think about clothing. Don't go with really crazy patterns or anything like that. Go with block colors. It's common sense really a lot of the time. And you don't want a situation like this to happen, which I'm going to show you.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. The party. My apologies.
His days is a classic, isn't it?
Yeah, you get the idea. So brief everybody in your office, in your house, wherever it is that you are going to be doing an interview. And again, this couldn't have been worse, and it went absolutely viral. This feels like a really obvious one, but when you're being interviewed, and Chris spoke about Soundbites and the fact that we are moving towards this kind of soundbite culture, and land a good soundbite or a good quote on a radio interview. There's going to be 10 to 15 bulletins a day. And if you get a good soundbite, you could be featured 15 times throughout the day. So think about, these sound bites, and part of that is speaking in complete sentences. So don't just answer the question, listen to the question, and then rephrase it back into your answer. So to bring that to life, do you believe you provide customers a quality product? Yes, we do. Now that's a terrible response. That's how you'd respond in a conversation, but that's not how media interviews want your response. A better response would be, I believe we do provide customers a quality product. In fact, I've got data to back this up, X, Y, Z. So rephrase the question as part of your answer, and then answer question. And a lot of people actually forget to do this. I've talked about sound bites. The rule of three is really important. It's got to be natural though. So things like alliteration, similes, or metaphors all can work quite well. Don't overdo it, because it's really kind of cringy when you see somebody trying to crowbar in sound bites or crowbar in key messages too much into an interview. It's got to be authentic, and it's got to be natural, and practice it. Practice it in some mock interview scenarios with your PR team or with your comms team. So build back better, take back control, see it, say it, sort it. And we're really seeing a movement towards, and it's actually borrowed from US politics, this idea of kind of, and you see UK politicians, for example, using sound bites loads now, because they know that the news agenda has changed, the way we have much punchier news bulletins repeated throughout the day, and they try and land these sound bites. Often it sounds incredibly contrived. So think about what your sound bites might be. 5-star customer service. It might be, I don't know, whatever it is, whatever's appropriate for your business, and try, or brand, and try and think about how you can land this messaging in interviews.
Do you remember Theresa May's?
Oh, was that? What was that? Remind me.
And they were all clearly all briefed to use it. Strong and stable, wasn't it?
That's right.
Remember?
Yeah, and everybody used it over the course of about 2 weeks. I must have heard it about 5
times. Yeah, everyone got sick of it.
This is a tricky one, but don't repeat negative phrases. So journalists will often use kind of emotive negative language in their question. Now, it's really important that you listen to that question, but don't repeat the negative phrase. What you can actually do is reframe the question and, using a kind of a signed off or benign phrase. So I'll bring that to life. Tell us about the crisis you faced today, Chris. So if I was to respond to that and say, well, we have today had a fairly serious crisis. All I'm doing there is repeating the fact that we've had a crisis, and I'm sort of perpetuating that negative language. Now, what a skilled interviewee would do is take the negative phrase and actually reframe it as something benign or positive. So, tell us about the crisis you faced today. Well, we've had a number of issues today which we're busy resolving. So what I've done there, it seems quite subtle, but I've removed the word crisis and I've reframed it as an issue, or I might say challenges. So it's really important you do that, because then that quote I say might be used as a soundbite. And then what happens is, if I've said crisis, the fact that my company now gets associated with the fact that we're having a crisis, and my soundbite gets repeated 20 times a day using the word crisis. Whereas if I've said challenges or issues, it's a much more benign phrase. So and journalists will do this all the time, use negative language in a question in the hope that the individual will repeat it. Knowing when to stop is really important as well. And I think as humans, we naturally want to fill the silence. If you think about a conversation, if there's an awkward silence in a conversation, it's natural for somebody to continue talking, really, to fill that silence. So journalists know this, and often they will just stop speaking and hope you gabble away, basically. And the more you speak, the more likely you are to say something you didn't intend to say, or the more likely you are to say something as off message. So if you've ever listened to a Louis Theroux interview, he's very good at using silence, and he will just stay silent for 30 seconds sometimes, and the other person starts talking and starts saying stuff that they didn't want to say, they didn't want to reveal. So what I would say is, answer the question, answer it fully, and answer it well, but stop talking. Once you've answered the question, stop talking. Now, if it's a broadcast journalist, they're not going to leave much of a silence, because that's the worst thing a broadcast journalist can get is an awkward silence in an interview. So pretty quickly, they're going to jump in and ask another question and fill the silence. So it does require a little bit of experience and a little bit of confidence, but definitely be aware of this. So, you might say, that's categorically not true. In fact, we know that this year alone, we've had an exemplary safety record with only XXX reported site incidents. So you've answered the question. You've also shut the question down by using statistics. So there's nowhere really the journalist can go if you say, our records say we've only had 10 reported site incidents in the last 12 months. You've used your own data. As far as the journalist knows, that's true. It doesn't really give them anywhere to go. If there's then some silence, you might say, in fact, if I think about it, and then you start talking, and you start weakening what you've already said, and then you might start revealing some evidence that is contrary to what you've just said. So be confident and like I say, answer the question fully, but then stop talking. And I sort of alluded to this, but it's really important to kind of shut negative lines of questioning down. And when you shut the negative line of questioning down, the journalist will probably they'll be satisfied with that section. They're unlikely to keep on pushing you if you've adequately shut something down with a fact or something like that, and then they'll move on to a different segment of the interview. But if you don't shut it down, they'll keep on pursuing that line of questioning. And they'll keep on asking you questions about it, and you'll start to get flustered, and you might start to flap. So, I would always say kind of hedge your bets in this respect. So, you might get challenged, but you're unlikely to get challenged about your own statistics and your own figures. So I gave the safety record statistics earlier. You probably won't get challenged on that, and the journalist will probably move on. And ultimately, you're the expert in your own business, your own sector. Your own company data and statistics, or at least you should, much better than the journalist. So you need to be firm with this stuff. So, your product is substandard, isn't it? Again, don't get defensive here, journalists. If you're defensive, it turns into a bit of an argument. But you could say, that's categorically not true. So that you're stating your point there, and then you bring in your own data. In fact, for the last 5 years, we've had a 5-star rating, which is the gold standard of customer satisfaction. So you've really kind of shut that question down there. You've been very firm. You've brought in your own data, and there's nowhere the journalists can really go with that. So this is why having these facts and figures at your fingertips in an interview is so important. Empathy is really important in an interview as well, particularly if it's an issue or a crisis. So you see politicians doing this all the time, and I think a lot of the time we should look to politicians. Often they get it wrong, but they are the masters of media interviews a lot of the time, and they'll often say something like, before they even answer the question, look, I want to say first of all, clearly our thoughts go out to all affected by today's tragic events. So that immediately establishes empathy with the audience, and that's really, really important. So get to the heart of what the story is about. If you've had a big customer service issue, if you're a house builder, for the sake of argument, we gave a house builder example, and somebody's been injured on the site, the story isn't about you as a business. The story is about individuals. It's about people that have been hurt. So try to get to the heart of what the story is about, and often it's about people. And if it's about people, show some empathy rather than just going in with a kind of a cold business response. So clearly our thoughts go out to all affected by today's tragic events is a good start. Alternatively, you could answer the question just as well. We've had a technical issue with a subcontractor that we're looking into. So you've failed to establish any kind of empathy there. You've gone straight into excuses. You've gone straight into a business, a kind of a business focus rather than a person focus. And that's going to get audiences turning against you from the outset. So do think about showing empathy before talking about the reasons why something has happened. This is a bit of a favorite, actually. A lot of the time, we call it the hot mic. So a lot of the time when you're doing particularly broadcast interviews, guests will get mic'd up in advance of the interview, often 20 minutes in advance, and the mic's often left on as well, by the way. So and the same goes for when the interview's ended. I think Prince Charles, in fact, it's Gordon Brown, wasn't it? Gordon Brown got caught out by this when he said,
the bigoted woman.
"Oh, look, it's that horrible bigoted woman." When he was back in his parliamentary car, wasn't he? And and his mic was still on, and this happens all the time. So this is the whole idea that when you're mic'd up, when you're in the BBC's offices or Sky's broadcasting studio, you're in enemy territory effectively. Be careful what you say. There's journalists everywhere, particularly if you're a CEO of a blue chip. And beware, the mic might be on. Now, there's a great example here, and I don't know what he was thinking, but this is when, and if the funny thing is the deal fell through actually, but the CEO from Sainsbury's was due to merge with Asda, and it was going to make the CEO 50 million quid basically. And the deal was nearly done, and he got interviewed on ITV News. He forgot the mic was still on. And before the interview, he started singing a little song. Money, the sky is sunny. Let's send it, rolling along. We're in the money, the sky is sunny. He was obviously nervous and obviously a little bit bored because he'd been made to sit around for a while. But why on earth he was singing a song, and even that song, and it made national headlines everywhere, didn't it? It's brilliant, shocking.
Absolutely brilliant.
And then the deal fell through as well.
Surprisingly,
yeah. We've just pulled out a few of our favourites there. I'll come on to it later. When we train our clients for sort of more advanced media training, we talk through loads and loads of theory. There's about 10 or 15 other kind of common tricks and techniques journalists will use. And then what we do is we actually put our clients under a bit of pressure, and we sit them down in a room. We get our camera crew on them. We get the lights turned up brightly, and we actually draft in a former national media journalist to actually give them a grilling for 10 minutes. And then what we do is watch the videos back, and then we kind of pause them and we critique them, and then we try it again and we try it again. And what happens is people actually come out of that training session. It can be half a day, and they're sharp, and they're calm under pressure, and they know how to handle an interview. And that's such an effective way to actually prepare your senior team for these kind of media interviews. It's all about practice. You can't possibly get better without practicing. And really, that's something you should be doing every 6 months if you've got a chief exec or a leadership team who want to do more of or do a lot of media interviews. Nearly finished. We'll wrap up in a second. So, what not to do in a media interview. I think a lot of this is fairly obvious. Don't say no comment. I mean, I think that's almost become a kind of a Hollywood, common parlance. You see it in movies and stuff, don't you? But you should never say no comment in an interview. You can say, look, my role is X, Y, Z. I'm just not qualified to answer that question, or great question. You'd be better speaking to X, Y, Z. But to say no comment is incredibly cliched and is not particularly helpful. I mentioned this, but don't repeat negative phrases, but also don't use negative language as a whole in your responses. Always avoid jargon and technical language. We get it. Your sector really well. You'll know the techie nuances of what it is you do, but the general public will not know that. So you've got to break down what you do and present it in a really engaging, clear, simple way. And it'll just frustrate journalists if you're overly jargony. I can't tell you that, or I won't tell you that. That's not an appropriate thing to say. That's going to become very confrontational very quickly. Very lengthy, rambling answers. I mean, don't say one-word answers. Like I said, answer the question fully, but you do need to stop speaking. A sentence, a paragraph is fine. Don't answer for 10 minutes and ramble on and on and on. Don't kind of get into this, lecturing the audience or lecturing the interviewer. Again, that's going to get the audience against you very, very quickly. It's going to put the interviewers back up. And don't kind of speculate. If you're posed a hypothetical question, how do you think you would react to this if it happened to you? That's hypothetical, and you should never kind of speculate. You should focus on the facts. But ultimately, in a media interview, the best people at media interviews roll with the punches, and they're confident. They sometimes the interviews take an unusual twist and turn. Don't kind of always bring it back to your agenda. Roll with the punches, go with it, have a light touch if it's appropriate, but gently bring it back to your agenda, gently put in your key messages, but really it's about practice. Right. A few quick dirty tricks before we wrap up. How are we doing for time?
You got like 4 minutes.
Right, okay.
We might overrun slightly. But...
Yeah. Okay. So some quick dirty tricks and how to respond. The rabbit punch. This is when the journalist asks a destabilizing first question that you're not even ready for, and it might be personal or unexpected. So Paxman used to be the king of this. So we interviewed Anne Widdecombe. Were you a little in love with Michael Howard? Or to the Italian ambassador, sir, your country is lying to us, isn't it? So the rabbit punch might catch us out. We might not have been prepared for this. So the way to do it is basically respond briefly and with a light touch. So the Anne Widdecombe example, she could have said something like, Jeremy, very very I'm in love with my husband, or something like that. And this is about rolling with the punches and showing a bit of humor. Don't get rattled is what we're saying, because that's what they want. But this isn't generally going to happen to you. The personal question, always make sure you remember what the company line is and don't get drawn into offering personal opinion. So this is a great example of this. The head of Barclays, which is the UK's biggest credit card company, in the interview, they asked him, would he use a credit card himself? And would his family use a credit card? And he said, no, of course not. They're too expensive, which is an absolutely crazy thing to do, because then the headlines around the world were a little fatherly advice from the head of Barclays. Don't use credit cards because they're too expensive. And how this guy, Matt Barrett, who's on £1.7 million a year, didn't see that one coming, is surprising. So be aware of when the question's personal and the impact it could have, and make sure you kind of toe the company line. Small talk. Again, don't be really buttoned up and uptight when you go into an interview, but do be aware that small talk can inadvertently reveal something you don't want it to. So the journalist might say, how are you today? and you might say, "I'm great, thank you," but you're there to talk about 5 of your factories being closed. So the journalist will say, "You're great, are you? And you're closing 5 factories." Equally, "You're looking well. Have you been on holiday?" And you might say, "Yes, I've just been in Barbados for 2 weeks." And this is at the same time as you're making a series of redundancies. So straight away, the small talk then becomes the story. So chief exec suns himself in Barbados while company makes half the team redundant. So do be aware of small talk at the beginning of an interview. Open questions can be quite a challenge as well, because an open question doesn't really steer you in terms of what direction you want to go in. And when the question's open, you might inadvertently reveal something or talk about something which is off brief. And often they'll start with an open question as opposed to a focused question. So what's happened today then versus what's caused the IT outage you faced today then? So what's caused the IT outage you faced today is a fairly straightforward question. You could say, we've faced a number of issues, and then you go down that route. But what's happened today then? You might say, well, we've had an IT outage. We've lost a number of customers. Some of the staff have walked out. We can't get into the office because of that. Suddenly you've revealed a way bigger story than you intended to. So be aware of the open question. The Columbo question is a bit of an and finally. I'll end with this one actually, because I think this is quite a good one. So this is really, really common with journalists when they ask you something as a final question that's completely off brief. So Columbo used to do this, if you remember the TV detective from the 80s, probably. He'd always kind of ask a final question, and it would always be a real killer question that would catch the murderer out. And journalists sometimes do this. So, that's great. Thanks, Will. While I've got you, as a man in a powerful position, I'd love to know your thoughts on the Gino D'Acampo scandal. So you thought that you were there to talk about your business's opening a new office in London, and actually you've suddenly been steered down a route where you're talking about Gino D'Acampo being cancelled from ITV. So be aware you might get asked these kind of questions. Often it's politically led. What do you think about the Labour government's policies to do X? But you don't always have to answer these. You could easily say, look, that's not my area of specialism. As you know, I'm here to talk about X, Y, Z, and then smile. And that's a good way to end it, and it won't get included. But don't necessarily be, if you've got nothing to add in this area, don't be too tempted to, you're under no obligation to answer it. So, slightly overrunning, but I'm hoping you're finding this of value. 5 ways to improve your media interviews tomorrow. And ultimately, it's about getting better at what you're doing. So always view the media interview through a digital or social lens. We're not, as Chris kind of said, we're no longer purely analog. It's no longer the print copy of the Times. The chances are they're going to want to bring a video camera. They're going to be pushing for kind of social media sound bites, and you could become a meme, like it or not. Always prep an insight. Do your research before an interview, and use those insight tools at your disposal to do that. Consider using AI to put you through your paces. So put your press release or your announcement through AI and look at some really tough questions you might get asked. Always test, practice. So scenario test and practice on camera, and that's something we can help you with. And think about a media interview in terms of sound bites and finesse your messages. So try and land those messages, try and land the sound bites, and in a natural and engaging way. So I'm hoping that was useful and interesting. We do have a package that's based around media training that you may be interested in. Essentially, I sort of talked about this earlier, but we work with our clients. We train them in the latest kind of media training theory that's bespoke to your sector. And we then do a half-day session of journalist-led mock interviews when we put the pressure on. We have lighting and camera crews, and we put you through your paces. And then you get a kind of an internal playbook out at the end of that, your key messages, how to handle difficult questions, etc., etc. And that starts at 4,995 as a package. So by all means, give us a shout if you want to talk about that in more detail. So thank you very much. A little bit of a different one today, but definitely an interesting emerging discipline.